There's one more thing common other than their whiteness between Jack Black, Jonah Hill, and Adam Sandler.
Was he Jew? He was, yes.
Yeah. They are a secret club for portly, are charismatic comedians, and guess what? They all are Jews. But are they really white? Because race and whiteness go a long way back. So let's find out the truth. Jews around the world. Not all Jews are born with a white skin. Oh, I burst your bubble, didn't I? Jews all over the world have different colors, and of course sizes too. Some are brown, some are black. There are Ethiopian Jews, there are Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, and let's not forget our Latin American Jewish amigos, salsa and matzah, yes please. So the stereotype that Jews are exclusively white is not true. But what about the Ashkenazi Jews that are white? And almost 95% of all American Jews are Ashkenazi Jews? The real question here is, what does being white mean? Before we answer this question, please like and subscribe. It really helps us to grow. Now over to a history lesson. Lesson across the history. Origin of the white race. Being white is not as simple as having your skin color white. It's a lot more complicated. It is difficult to trace back the roots of whiteness, but according to the historian Neil Irvin Painter, white identity didn't just spring to life full-blown and unchanging. It roots back to the colonial period. The race came to life in the 17th century when Europeans started to emerge as powerful might influencing the people. Early European colonizers, particularly in North America, faced the challenge of establishing social hierarchies among diverse groups of people, including indigenous populations and those brought from Africa as slaves. As a result, a system of racial classification emerged to justify and perpetuate social, economic, and political inequalities. Thus began racism around the world, and there were different definitions of it. In America, if anyone had African ancestry, then they were not considered white according to the one-drop rule. And in Nazi Germany, Hitler gave the title of honorary Aryan to Japanese and Chinese to identify them as Aryan whites. The white rule in India and America, Germany, were all defined differently, but they had one thing in common. During these three regimes, the whites held the power, and all other people were not considered equals, giving power to white supremacy. So what about the Jews? Were they white? Jews and whiteness, racial persecution. The question of whether Jews are considered white is multifaceted and has evolved over time with complex historical and social dimensions. To understand this, we can explore key historical events, including the persecution of Jews during the Crusades and the Holocaust. During the Crusades, 11th to 13th centuries, Jews were indeed targets of violence and persecution, driven by religious fervor and prejudice. However, this persecution was rooted in religious differences rather than racial distinctions. Fast forward to the Holocaust in the 20th century, when Jews were systematically targeted by the Nazis. Both these events are key to understanding that Jews were not white, as they were considered inferior and persecuted. So what changed? In terms of early Jewish settlement in America, the first Jewish migrants arrived in the 17th century, with the establishment of the New Amsterdam colony. Jewish communities grew over the centuries, and by 1790, Jews were included in the list of free white persons eligible to be citizens of America. More and more Jews started to arrive in America from Eastern Europe by the late 1800s, and they were different, as they had an entirely different culture than that of American whites. Antisemitism persisted in the United States. Discrimination against Jews was evident in various forms, such as exclusionary practices and prejudiced attitudes, as these Ashkenazi Jews were not as much welcomed into the country, different to the white Anglo-Saxon immigrants. Jews found it hard to find employment and were called slurs, such as swarthy, resulting in flooded city courts with Jews who wanted to change their surnames. Even famous personalities like Jacob Riis and Thomas Watson considered Jews to be the worst ethnic group and lower than African blacks. Things got worse after the First World War as communism was on the rise in the Soviet Union, and hatred against the Jews grew as they were seen as infiltrators, as they didn't fit in the white-dominant society. Jewish struggle for acceptance. The American hierarchy was subject to changes after the war, and Jews started to work on themselves to climb up the ladder of hierarchy. Jews started educating themselves and getting jobs in order to improve socially and economically. However, they were still discriminated against and lived separately. More problems arose as the Great Depression hit USA, and there was a major rift in relations between the Jews and Anglo-Saxon whites. The Jews were trying hard to be accepted in the society as whites, whereas the Anglo-Saxon whites weren't ready to accept this social change. Jews were trying ways such as painting their face black in their performance of social Jewish clubs, as only whites could do this. On the other hand, the whites blamed the Jewish for the antisemitism and hatred was spreading like wildfire, which was fueled by speeches such as the one by Charles Coughlin on his weekly radio show. As 1930s began, Jewish struggle continued, as even now Jews were still banned from clubs and neighborhoods. Jews were limited to quotas in many Ivy League schools, preventing them from overtaking the white majority as they were not considered whites. Jews were only able to own homes and stores in non-black neighborhoods, meaning mostly in black neighborhoods. This somewhat led to better relations between white-presenting Jews and blacks, but the blacks also feared that they would be exploited as they were starting to see Jews as part of the white hierarchy. Fruit of the efforts. World War II changed the situation of Jews who were struggling to be accepted as whites. After serving in the army, many Jews were allowed to take benefit from the GI Bill benefits that were not allowed for the black veterans of war. White-presenting Jews started to rise to white-collar jobs and were being appointed as managers and professionals. With this social status rise, they were somewhat being accepted by the whites. However, these white-presenting Jews don't like to be categorized as whites, as white supremacy has been the reason behind past persecutions against the minorities. Even recent horrific accidents, such as the New Zealand and US mass shootings, were fueled by this ideology of white supremacy and maintaining the power of whites. Hatred is still present against the Jews, which was evident by the Tree of Life shooter in Pittsburgh, whose sole reason was hate and anti-Semitism. White supremacists in Charlottesville blamed Jews for destroying their white culture. Whatsoever, Jews have stood firm and worked hard for their place in America, and to really fit them in a box of race and color won't be right. It's not about choosing sides between the oppressor and oppressed, but more about understanding each other. Over the line. To write of all the Jews as white will be wrong, as it will mean ignoring the existence of Jews of other color. Labeling Jews as oppressors is only a breed of anti-Semitism, and it entirely turns a blind eye towards the fact that Jews still face danger as the number of anti-Semitic incidents are on the record high today, and according to FBI, Jews are mostly the target of hate crimes in the US. We cannot really ask them to throw away their religion in order to be accepted in the society, as it will not be anything but victim blaming. It will also be denial of the fact that Jews have faced persecution in places like Germany at the hands of Nazis. It is not right to point the cannon of oppressor and just blow it, because that will be unjust and unethical. Even today, many white supremacists label the Ashkenazi Jews with physical characteristics such as dark brown curly hair or aquiline noses to identify them. Labels are not wrong, as it helps the society to hold together the cultural values that they belong to, but they shouldn't be a source of hatred against any race, as labels are not enough to understand the complicated history of any race, such as the Jews. As we conclude this exploration into the question, are Jews white? It's clear that the answer is as complex as the history and diversity of the Jewish people themselves. As we continue these conversations, let's strive for understanding, appreciation, and unity. Don't forget to like and subscribe.